Hello everyone and welcome to another BlenderMadeEasy tutorial. Today we're going to be creating this freeze over effect using geometry nodes. And since we're using geometry nodes, it's completely procedural and it's very customizable. You can change the scale of the particles, the length of the icicles, how big the ice is, and there's a lot of cool things that we're going to cover in this tutorial. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started by deleting the default cube and then pressing Shift A, and you can add in any model that you like. You can have your own, or if you want to just follow along, I'm going to be using a monkey head. We can add this in and then jump over to the modifier tab and add in a subdivision surface just to smooth it out, and then go ahead and apply that modifier. Let's also right click and shade it smooth. Now before we get into geometry nodes, I want to quickly model a particle that we're going to be using. We could do this in geometry nodes if we wanted to, but I found it easier just to actually model it and then import that into geometry nodes. So what we'll do is we'll come over to the right side, we'll right click and create a new collection. We'll double tap on the collection and call it particles, and then go to that collection by hitting 2 on your keyboard. What we'll do is we'll press Shift A, add in a cone, and then we're going to open up this panel and set the number of vertices down to 4. Then we're just going to quickly model a little icicle that's going to be used for the particles. Make sure the origin point is right at the bottom right there, and something like that will look pretty good. Next, we'll move it over to the side and add in 2 more variations. Alright, so now that we have our 3 particles, let's go back to collection 1 by hitting 1 on our keyboard, and then open up geometry nodes. You can come over to the top menu and select the geometry nodes workspace, or you can split the view and switch it over to geometry nodes. I like working with a vertical workspace rather than a horizontal one down here, so we're going to use this vertical one, but it really doesn't matter. So the first thing that we'll do is create a new system. There are 3 different things that we're going to be creating in this tutorial. The first one is going to be the particles, then we'll work on the big chunks of ice, and then finally we will create the icicles. So starting out with the particles, what we need to do is add in a distribute points on faces node. We'll place that right here. And I also want to still see my monkey head, so I'm going to Shift D this group input and drag it over here. I don't want a line going all the way from the input to the output, so I'm just going to duplicate the input and then just plug it in right here. We're going to add in a join geometry node and then just plug it in just like that. So over here with the distribute points on faces node, this density values controls how many particles there's going to be. Let's go with a value of 1000. We're going to instance something on those points. So we need an instance on points node. We'll place that here. And then to grab our particles, all we have to do is click and drag and bring it over here. Then we can take the geometry and plug it into the instance. We're going to turn on relative, turn on separate children, and reset children. You can see everything is really big, so let's go over to collection 2 once again, select everything, and scale them down quite a bit. We could do this in geometry nodes, but I'm just going to do it here. Then we're going to press Ctrl A and apply the scale. That's very important to make sure you apply the scale. Then we'll jump back over to collection 1, and we can see this looks a lot better. Next up, let's randomize the rotation. We're going to press Shift A to do this. We're going to add in a random value node, then just take the value and plug it into the rotation. For this value, all we really have to do is turn it up to a random number, or if you want to get really specific, just type in pi times 2 to get the exact number for complete randomness. And there we go. That looks pretty good. So how this is going to work is we're going to take the position of an empty object, and based on the position, it's going to affect the scale of everything. That's how we're going to get that transition effect. So to do this, we're going to press Shift A and go over to empty and then add in a sphere. This is going to be our controller. Then what we'll do is we'll select our geometry nodes. I'm also going to pin it so this stays right here without disappearing, even if we select a different object. So what we're going to do now is grab the empty and drag it into geometry nodes. We need to add in an input and then a position node. We'll place that right here. Then we'll take the distance by going over to vector, add in a vector math node, take the position, plug it in, and the location, plug it in as well, and switch it over to the distance. So now this value gives us the distance. If we plug it into the scale, you can see it is working, but it's currently inverted. So what we need to do is add in a map range node to flip the values. Let's go over to utilities and then add in a map range. We'll place that right here. And with these different values, we're going to change a couple of them. First off, the from maximum allows you to control like the gradient. And to see this a bit better, let's flip the to min to the to max. So we'll set the min to 1 and the max to 0. So now what happens is if we drag the maximum value up, you can see it's actually working. And also, I think we need to come over here, turn on relative, so it actually takes the position of the empty rather than the original position. So make sure that is on. And now if we come back over to the map range node, this bottom value basically controls the effect of it. We're actually going to bring this a bit lower. Let's go with a value of about 0.7. And then the minimum controls the minimum scale that it will be. If the empty is right at this position, it controls the max scale. So if I drag it up, they become bigger. If I drag it lower, they're going to become smaller. We may need to play around with this value, but I'm probably going to go with around about there or so, maybe a bit more. Also might notice that there is not very much variation in the scale. So let's add in a noise texture to add in even more variation to the particles. Let's go over to texture and then add in a noise texture. We're going to add in a color ramp as well to control this a bit more. And then finally, to plug it into our map range node, we need a utilities and then a math node. We'll place that right there. We're going to switch it over to subtract. Then we'll take the factor, plug it into the factor, and then the color is going to go into the color of the subtract. If we then take this black value, drag it closer, and then the white value, drag this closer as well, we can see the effect that we're getting. And as you can see here, there's a lot more randomness. Coming back over here, I might set the scale just a bit lower, and then the max scale I might drag just a little bit lower as well. Now you can see if we move the empty around, it changes the scale based on the position, and that is really cool. Now before we continue on, I want to just quickly thank the sponsor of this video. I've been working with Skillshare for a couple years now, and instead of just listing everything that they have to offer, I'm going to tell you guys what I personally like about it. I've gone through a lot of the classes on their platform, and from personal experience, I can tell you that they're actually really fun to go through. They offer a lot of great information, and the teachers on there make it engaging and exciting to learn. Initially, I got started because I wanted to learn video editing to make my videos here on YouTube better, but then I also found myself learning about some Blender topics as well. This class here by Bad Normals is also all about geometry nodes and how to create a Raspberry procedurally. He goes through each step and explains why he does certain things, and I actually really enjoyed it, and here is my end result from the class. Definitely recommend checking it out if you are new to geometry nodes. Right now you can take this class for free by using the link in the description or the pinned comment, and not only that, but you'll also have access to every single class on their platform for an entire month. So go ahead, click the link in the description, and while you're over there you can also check out my 9 other Blender classes as well. Thanks again to Skillshare for sponsoring the video. Now let's get back to the tutorial. One more thing that I'm going to add though is a value that controls everything. Because right now if we wanted to move the empty over to here to fill out the entire monkey head, the particles on the right side are going to start disappearing, as you can see. So let's add in one value that controls everything. We're going to go over to utilities and add in a math node. Place it right here to the distance, set it to subtract. Now this value controls everything. So if I was to set it really low, you can see all of them disappear. If I drag it higher, it controls everything, and now the entire thing is filled with particles. There we go, we've now added the particles, so now let's work on the actual ice itself. To do this, we're going to take the distribute points on faces node once again, Control-Shift-D to duplicate it while keeping the connection, and then we're going to take those points, add volume to them, and then convert them to meshes. So first off, we're going to go to points and then points to volume. We'll place that right there. We're going to take the points, plug it in, and if we take a look at this by Control-Shift clicking on this, so you can see here the entire thing is filled with volume, and that's looking pretty good so far, but there are a lot of things that we need to change. First off, we're going to change the radius. Let's just bring this down so it's a bit smaller for now. Let's then convert the volume into mesh. So we're going to go over to volume right here and then go volume to mesh and place it like that. So now we actually have mesh in our scene. Next up, I want to smooth it out. So we're going to add in a subdivision surface. So type in sub, and then we'll go subdivision surface. We'll place it right there. Now it looks a lot more smooth. And then finally, to smooth everything out as well, we're just going to go shade, set shade smooth and place it right there. There we go, that looks pretty good. So now what we're going to do is basically the same thing down here. We're going to be adding in a map range node to control the radius. So as the empty moves around, it scales up the radius of each of those points and gives us the ice. So what we need is another utilities map range node. Then we're going to take the subtract value, plug it in, and then take this value and plug it into the radius. Then of course we need to flip these values, so we're going to set the min to 1 and the max to 0. And you can see this is the effect that we're getting. But currently these are not the values that we need to change them a bit more. So we're going to set the to minimum much lower. Let's go with a value of about 0.1 or so, and you can see there that looks a bit better. Over here in the voxel amount, we're going to bring this value up to give us more resolution. Let's go with 128. Let's also give it some random variation by doing something similar down here. We're going to take the color ramp and noise texture, Shift D it and move it up. Let's actually move everything up so we have a bit more room. And then what we can do is just combine this with the map range node. So we're going to press Shift A, and to combine it, we'll use another math node. We'll place it over here, switch it over to multiply, then we'll take the color and plug it into the bottom value. Over here, we're going to bring the detail up just a little bit because right now it's kind of too much of an effect. So let's bring this value this way. We'll bring the white value up a little bit as well. And then the roughness will drag up a little bit higher, and the distortion maybe will go up to 0.1. I think the from max might be a bit too low, so let's drag this value up as well just a little bit to give us more ice in the scene. Now what we can do is we can take that is shade smooth and plug it into the join geometry to see what original mesh looks like and the particles as well. Here, let's get rid of that viewer node. Once we move this empty, you can see the particles are appearing, and so is the ice, and that is looking pretty cool. You might notice though that the ice is looking a bit too flat and plain, so let's also add some randomness to that as well. To do this, we're going to be adding in a new noise texture. We'll place it over here. Then we're going to take the position of all of those vertices, so we need a set position node. We'll place that right here, and then we're going to take the color and plug it into the offset. You can see it moves everything over to the right side, so we need a vector math node to fix that. We'll set it down to subtract and then minus 0.5 to everything. There we go. Now it's back in its original position, but the strength of it is way too high. So let's scale it down by adding in a new vector math node. I'll just Shift D the subtract. We'll switch it down to scale. And now this bottom value controls the scale of the noise. Let's bring this much lower, probably around a value of about 0.12 or so. Maybe that will look pretty good. And then for the scale down here, I'm going to bring this a bit lower. Let's go with a value of 3. The roughness will drag up just a tiny bit, and then the distortion will also bring up just a little bit. So here is the difference. With this turned off, we can see it's kind of plain. With it turned on, it just gives it some random variation in the thickness, and I think that looks pretty good. Then all you really have to do here is just play around with the different values. If you want more ice in the scene, you can bring up the to min, and this will give it some more thickness, as you can see there. And then if you want less ice, like a smoother gradient or so, just play around with the from max value. A lot of these are just playing around with the values until you are happy with how it looks. Alright, everything is looking pretty good so far. The empty is working properly, the ice is transitioning, but now we need to add in some icicles. So now let's learn how we can take the faces that are underneath all of these faces right here and add icicles to them. Because we don't really want icicles growing on the top right here or like off the side. We only want them growing on the faces that are pointing down. And we can do this by adding in a normal node. So let's press Shift A, we'll type in normal, select that and place it down here. The next node that we need is another vector math node. We're going to plug it in here. We'll take the normal and plug it into the top input and switch this over to dot product. The dot product is some equation with algebra, and it gets a little bit complicated, and I myself don't really understand it. But what this allows us to do is take the position of the X, Y, and Z values and create a basic mask. We can see here in the material, if we plug in a geometry node with the normal input and plug it into a dot product, and if we then take the first value up a little bit, we can see that this is the effect that we're getting. All of the values on the positive X side are becoming a white color, which gives us a higher value. Same thing for the Z. If we were to drag up the Z value, you can see all the faces on top are now becoming a lighter value. If we drag it in the negative direction though, we can see underneath all of the values are becoming white. And this is basically what we're going to be using as a mask when we create the icicles. So jumping back over to our scene here, we're going to set the negative Z value right here. Let's go with a value of negative 1.5, and I think that will work pretty good. Then what we need to do is add in another distribute points on faces. We're going to take this value and plug it directly into the density. Then to control this a bit more, we're going to add in a utilities math node, set it over to multiply, and this volume value now controls the amount of particles that are going to be in our scene. Let's take a look at this by Control-Shift left clicking on this, and we can't see anything at the moment, and that's because we need to take our original geometry, plug it into the mesh, and there we go. We now have all of the particles underneath here, and that is looking pretty good. For this multiply node, we're going to set it up to 25 just to give us some more particles. Moving on from here, we're going to add in some instances on points. We'll place it here, and for the instance, we're actually going to be using curves. So jumping over to the curve primitives, we're going to add in a curve line. We'll take the curve, plug it into the instance. And then over here, we're going to set the negative n so it goes down instead of up. We're going to go with a value of negative 0.5 and enter. Next up, we're going to randomize the scale of them based on the position. So again, we need another utilities map range node. We're going to take this value over here in the subtract, take it out and plug it into the value. Then the result is going to go into the scale. Then of course we need to flip these values once again. So the minimum is going to be 1 and 0. And there we go. So now it's changing based on the position of the empty. Now these values over here, we're going to change a little bit. The from max, we're going to drag up so it's a smoother gradient. Let's try 1.5. That looks pretty good. And then for the minimum, we're also going to bring up just a tiny bit just to make the max value a little bit more, and the icicles are going to be a bit longer. Probably around there is pretty good. We can always change this later once we actually add in the mesh and everything. And the next thing that we need to do is add thickness to them and then give them some randomness. So first off, we need to press Shift A and go over to instances, and then we need to realize the instances. Because right now it's not going to work if we added mesh, so let's realize those instances. Then what we can do is give it some thickness by adding in a curve to mesh. So we'll add in a curve to mesh. We'll place it right here. And then for the profile, we're going to need a circle. So let's go over to curve primitives, add in a curve circle, plug it in just like that. And we can see it's working, but they're currently way too big. So let's scale them down quite a bit. For this radius value, let's go 0.1. There we go. You can see it's working. Let's also fill in those caps so the top are completely filled in. The radius I think is just a bit too big right now, so let's scale that down just a bit more, and I think that is looking a bit better. Next up, I want the icicles to come to a point as they travel down. So what we need for this is we're going to add in a set curve radius node. We'll place it right here. And then for the radius, we're going to press Shift A and add in a spline parameter node. This value gives us the overall length of the curve, and if we take the length of it, plug it into the radius, that's going to give us this. Currently the value is inverted, so we need to fix that by adding in a reverse curve node. Reverse curve, we'll place that right there. And there we go. We now have the points going down, and that is looking pretty good. The next thing that we will do is give it some randomness, because right now everything is very uniform. They're all just going straight down. There's no displacement. So let's give it some randomness. But currently, if we go into wireframe, you can see there's no geometry going horizontally. So to fix that, let's add in a resample curve. We're going to go over to curve and add in a resample curve right here. We'll place it right here. And then based on the length of it, because right now they're going to be changing based on the position of the empty. So we need to set it to length. And for the length, we're going to go 0.005. So every 0.005 meters along this curve is going to add in a horizontal line. With that done, we can add in some displacement. We're basically going to do the exact same thing that we did over here. So let's select the set position, scale, subtract, and noise texture, Shift D it, and move it down here. If we then take the mesh, plug it into the geometry, and then geometry into the viewer node, we can see it's working. The values though are a bit too much, so let's come over here. We're going to set the scale of it up to 4. The detail amount we will also drag up a little bit. Let's try like 3 or so. And then for the scale right here, I think it's a bit too much. So let's go with a value of 0.05. And I think that is going to look a lot better. I think currently they're a bit too skinny. So over here in the curved circle, we can set this up a bit higher. Let's try 0.5. And there we go. We now have icicles in our scene, and then to combine it into our overall setup, we're going to take the geometry, plug it into the join geometry, get rid of this viewer node, and there we go. The length of it might be a bit too much, so if we come over here, we can change the length of it as well, just by lowering this value here, the end value. Let's try 0.4, just so they're a bit smaller, and there we go. If for some reason you have some that are sticking out like this, an easy way to fix that is just to add in a transform node. So let's go over to transform. We'll place it right here. So it's plugged into the distributes on faces, and then just lower the scale of the monkey head. So with this scale value, let's try 0.98, just like that. So it's just a tiny bit smaller. And there you go. You can see they're now inside the mesh. And there we go, we've now created this effect, and now once we move the empty, the icicles start to grow out, and that is looking pretty cool. Then of course, if you want to play around with the values of the particles or the ice or the icicles, just come over to the map range node and play around with these values until you're happy with the results. I think I'm liking how it looks right now, so I think I'm going to leave it. One thing that I might do though is with the distribute points on faces, I might set the density to twice this, so let's go with 2000. Just so we have more particles come into the scene. Then another thing I might do is come over here to the ice and just drag the to_min value. Nope, not the to_min. Drag the from. Yeah, up just a little bit so the ice spreads a bit more. All right, our geometry node setup is done. So now let's work on the material before we end this tutorial. Let's come up to this menu and select the shader editor and then create a new material. This material is just going to be the overall monkey head. It's not going to be the ice. And for this, you can use whatever you want. If you want to add in a texture, you can. But just for now, I'm just going to set it to a nice dark black color. And then the roughness, I'm going to go quite low so we get a nice glossy look. Next, we're going to create a new material. So jumping over to the material tab, we're going to create a new one. Hit that plus sign, then click on new, and we will call this material ice. Then we're going to make sure that we actually have the ice one selected. If you have the pinning option with the black material, even if you select the ice one, it's still going to display the black one. So make sure to unpin this shader editor and then select the ice material. To actually see this, let's press Z and go into the material preview, and we can see we have the black color, but now let's work on the ice. For this, we're going to turn up the transmission all the way up to 0.9. This will give us a nice look for the ice. And then we're going to add in some bump to give us more detail. We're going to press Shift A, go over to a noise texture. Then we're going to press Shift A and then add in a bump node. Take the factor, plug it into the height, and then the normal is going to go into the normal of the principled shader. Now the reason we can't see this in our scene right now is because we need to assign this new ice material to all of the objects. So let's jump back over to geometry nodes, and then over here we're going to add that material in. If we press Shift A, we can go over to material right here and then set material. We're going to place this after the join geometry. The problem though is that our original monkey head has now changed materials, so let's get rid of this. So let's hold Control and then right click to cancel that connection, and then just join it back up after this set geometry. So I'm just going to duplicate the join geometry, then take the group and plug it in just like that. So now our monkey head is still using that black material. Then over here, we're going to select the ice material. And this is going to affect everything that we've just created except for the monkey head. So now let's jump back over to the shader editor. We're going to select the ice material, make sure that's selected. And then to actually see this a bit more, we're going to turn up the scale. Let's try 25. Well, that's a bit too big still. Let's try 50. And then we can also bring the detail up a little bit, and the roughness we can also drag up just a little bit, and that'll give us a nice good look. There we go. The strength might be a bit too high, so let's bring that down by half, so 0.5. And then if you want to, you can also bring the color of it to more of a bluish color, a light blue color, something like that. Bring up the value as well. And then finally, to give some more variation in the roughness, let's add in a new texture. It's going to be a Musgrave texture. Then we'll take the height and plug it into the roughness. And to actually see this, we're going to press Control Shift and then left click with the Musgrave texture. Make sure you also have the Node Wrangler add-on to actually use that shortcut. And then with the scale, we're going to, actually not the scale, the dimension, we're going to set this much lower to 0.1. Then the detail is going to go all the way up to 15. And there we go. We now have a very nice looking mask that we can use for the roughness. Then if we go back over to our principled shader, it should look like that. And there we go, that is looking really nice. At this point, all you have to do here is just create a basic scene around it. You can animate the position of the empty to create that transition effect, or you can use the subtract node in the geometry node to control the overall position of the ice. So coming over here, you can change the subtract node, just drag it all the way up if you want to cover the entire thing with ice. But there you go, that is how you create a freeze over effect using geometry nodes. Thank you very much for watching, and again, this works for any object. You can add it to text, add it to any object that you like, and play around with the different values. You may need to change the map range node based on the object that you apply it to, but it should work consistently across any model. Thank you very much for watching this tutorial and making it all the way to the end. I hope you enjoyed and created something cool, and thanks again to Skillshare for sponsoring the video. If you have new tutorial ideas, let me know in the comments, but that'll be it. I will see you guys in the next one.